Good morning. This is Tracy Hales Vass with Right on Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM. Today I'm talking with Jacqueline Murray Loring about KiMo theater, fact, and folklore. Good morning, Jacqueline.
Good morning.
Well, I read both books, KiMo Theater and Vietnam Veterans Unbroken, and enjoyed them both. Learned a lot. So let's talk about...
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yes. I'm not an Albuquerque resident, but I visit there often, and I have not visited the KiMo Theater, but I certainly will now.
Oh, that's good to hear. It's interesting how many people, that even though it's been there almost 100 years, have never been there.
I'm sure. Well, I hope this book will change that.
Oh, good. Me too.
Yes. So what brought you to write this book?
Oh, well, a couple of things. I'm new as of 2013 here in Albuquerque. I'm from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and I always have to apologize for my pronunciation of a lot of words. I don't speak Spanish. But when I got here, I had been to the KiMo Theater a couple of times to watch independent movies. I had been to the KiMo Theater several times to see friends of mine with their independent movies. But I didn't really know much about it, just kind of a funky kind of place to go into.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a member of the Southwest Writers,
Mm-hmm.
and they were interested in doing a book on the KiMo Theater for the theater's 90th anniversary 2 years ago. And I was very interested in the evolution from showing silent movies
Mm-hmm.
to supporting the independent film community here in Albuquerque. And so they were looking for somebody to coordinate the interviews, and so I volunteered to do it, and it turned out to be a great fun, first of all, and a great learning experience, because people I probably would not have ever run into, like Rudy Miera and Ed Hellerman, and I got to meet them and interview them.
Oh, and it's exciting what they have to say about the KiMo. And its history is amazing, from the huge pipe organ to the ghost to everything that's gone through.
Yes. And when you think about the pieces of history in Albuquerque and probably New Mexico that are missing, this particular entity became a favorite with the community and with the government here in Albuquerque, and that's the only reason why it's still thriving after 90 years.
Yes, I was so glad to read that.
The theater was built in 1927 by the Bukecki family, which I learned by working on this history, was quite a well-known family all the years, even right now. But beginning back in the 1920s, Mr. Bukecki was very interested in movies and in movie theaters. And the KiMo Theater was not the only one that he owned or managed. And that family, Mr. Bukecki died. A lot of people don't realize that Mr. Bukecki, the year after the theater was built, and his wife, Maria, and his sons and daughter are the people who kept it going all these years until 1977, when the town, the city of Albuquerque, decided to buy it and to renovate it. It had fallen into some disrepair in the early 1970s. They were still, from what I can get from interviewing people, they were still showing films, but it was no longer the movie palace that it had been back in the 20s and the 30s. But it was still functioning. And so the city bought it from the Bukecki family, and in the 1977 into the 80s, they went about renovating it. There had been a very bad fire which had burned the curtain and a lot of the structure on the ceiling on the stage, and all of that was repaired. The arch that's the doorway between where the audience sits and the seats, the actors, the performers. That had been really pretty well destroyed. And so the city, with their preservation committee, got going, and in the late 70s and early, they renovated almost the entire inside. But that wasn't the only time. From what people told me, bonds had been voted on for years after that. And when you go through the book, you can see how they started with the inside, and then they moved to the stage, and then they moved to the lobby, which initially went, the auditorium where the theater part is, actually went to where the front door is. But over the years, the lobby moved further and further toward the screen, and so it had like 1,000 seats or something, 1,200 seats initially, but slowly there are fewer seats till they're out of what we have today. But then they did the upstairs, the murals upstairs, along the stairway. They have wrought iron birds, which every time I give a talk on it, it's interesting to hear. People are very, very firm that the birds, which are in the wrought iron on the railings all the way up the stairs, some people say that they were cranes, sandhill cranes. Some people are adamant that they actually became flamingos as the renovations were done. The railing wasn't high enough to meet the standards for being safe, and so the railings needed to go several inches higher. And the committee worked very, very hard to figure out how to enlarge the height of the railing without destroying the figures of the birds. And so some people will laugh and tell you that they went from being birds or cranes to being flamingos.
Oh, I like that.
And when a lot of people who have lived here for a long time hear the word flamingo, I can see them just cringe in the audience when I'm talking. But the book itself is about people's remembrances.
Yes.
It's not one person saying this is this and that's that. This book was written by interviewing people who were past government officials, people who worked at the theater, people who from La Compagnia, who performed there, from Air Dance, from Hocus Pocus.
Watermelon Jug Band.
The Watermelon Jug Band, that's one of my favorite stories in the whole
mine
book.
Mine too, yes.
And good. And I think it's something people don't know anything about. So
right, it was news to me. That was great.
Yeah, that's a fun story.
And the mayor who tried to get it renovated but cut short on his finances did a little bit, and they still gave him such a hard time.
You must be talking about Mr. Rusk?
Yes, Mr. Rusk.
Yes, I don't know him. He lives out of state. But he was very kind. I talked to him on the phone, and he sent me a very long story, I guess you would say, of his involvement and what the government did, what people in town did, what the library did. I kept asking him to name drop as much as possible, so he would go back and add another name and another name, because I think that's part of the history that is lost a lot of times. You can learn that something was renovated, but if you don't hear the names of the people, I think that loses a lot in the history of something like this theater.
I agree. It's a warm book, and it makes the place feel like it has so much personality.
Oh, that's nice, and it does. Of course, it does have.
Yeah.
It does have personality.
Well, tell us a little bit.
From what I understand, the only 2 theaters of its kind in the Pueblo Deco design left in the country.
I believe that, yeah. Did you take the photographs yourself, some of them?
I did take some of them, particularly the photographs that might be the only ones that exist, because while the renovation was happening in 2017, when all of the seats were taken out and put up on the stage or in the art gallery, and all the carpet was taken up and replaced. I don't think anybody else took photographs at that time.
Oh.
So that's kind of a fun thing. So
Absolutely.
All of the seats and the carpeting have all been replaced. But all the rest of the photographs came from fantastic other places. The Albuquerque Museum has quite a treasure trove of photographs. Larry Parker from the KiMo Theater has just hundreds and hundreds. Rush Dudley, who was a manager at one point, gave me a bunch. Rudy Miera, who is an author in town, he never threw anything away from all the times that he performed there with La Compagnia de Teatro.
How fun.
And so he met me. He was the first person I interviewed. And his enthusiasm kept me going because he kept saying, don't worry about me. There's all kinds of other people. Go see this person. Go see this person. But we met initially in a restaurant in Corrales. And he brought with him posters and flyers and after he showed me all the things he brought inside, then he took me out to his car and showed me a whole bunch more things, which he didn't want anything to happen to. He was very protective of them. And he let me take photographs. And those are things that have long since, that was back in the 30s and the 40s and 50s.
Wow.
He was just marvelous. But lots of people had photographs, and there were hundreds and hundreds of photographs that I couldn't use just because there was no room in the book. It's already almost a 300-page book. And that's another thing. There are hundreds of people, maybe dozens and dozens of people that I never got to interview.
Oh, that were still associated with it or had memories of it.
Yeah, I just couldn't include everybody.
And there was a fascinating story about the ghost, the little boy ghost.
Yes. I'm a little bit conflicted about the paranormal as far as writing the book is concerned. If you remember that I'm new to Albuquerque and I'm new to the KiMo Theater in Albuquerque as a community, but obviously I've been to there many times, and so I know that the paranormal is part of when you go into the theater what people want to talk about, they want to know about.
Right.
And so, but I also had spoken to somebody who said that they knew the little boy's family. Oh. And that after years of being told that the child's ghost was in the theater, that people had seen the child, the family just didn't believe, does not believe, that his spirit is there. And so this person told me that the family actually moved out of Albuquerque so they didn't have to be bombarded by questions any longer.
Oh, yeah.
And so I felt like I really wanted to be sensitive to both of the sides of that story.
Right.
And so what I did in the book is that as someone from the Southwest Opera Southwest, or whether they're from the New Mexico Young Actors, or whether they're from the ballet, as those people told stories about paranormal activity, I reported those in the stories that they told.
Right.
And so there were like 4 or 5 references to it as it got closer to publication. And then a woman came forward and said she had been a ballerina, and her story seemed to flesh out a lot of what other people had said. So I included that in there.
Right.
But I also hope it's done with respect to the family.
Yes, that would be touchy. Sometimes things like that just grow for the sake of the story rather than the truth of it.
Right. The other thing is there is a shrine inside the theater to him, and I think a lot of people expected that I would have a photograph of that in the book, but that was the point at which I thought, a lot of people describe it. You can get a sense of what it looks like, but I decided taking a photograph of it was just not a good idea. I'm sure somebody will for future books, but I just kind of thought that wasn't what I wanted to do.
I understand that, and I think that you handled that very well. It had to be mentioned, yes, but you don't linger on that as the heart of the story, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's part of the story.
Exactly. And we know that actors can be superstitious sometimes. with making sure
I was
everything...
told that repeatedly.
Yes, I've heard
Yes.
that. But it's a good
Yes.
story.
Yes, and Brad started from the Post Alliance. He told me, I think I included that too, he said that there was an instant when somebody could have been very seriously hurt and wasn't.
Right.
And they thanked the ghost of the little boy for that. So when people believe that kind of thing, you know, who am I to tell them it isn't true?
Right. You're reporting the facts and the stories.
Yes, yes.
Right. So it must have been a really fun and rich research project there.
Well, it was great fun. And because I started with a blank slate, every person I talked to told me something which sent me on another journey.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't until quite a way into it that I, if you've read the book, there's a story about a man, Benny Fox, who, according to the stories, was someone who climbed poles on the top of buildings all across the country as fundraisers and attempts to bring, you know, more publicity to whatever the event was. And Rush Dudley, I was trying to figure out what this story, one of the stories about a car that, and a photograph of people out in front of the KiMo Theater was all about. And he said, "Oh, that was just Benny. He climbed a pole." And I was like, well, "What's it? Benny climbed a what?" And so then I went back and I was like, no one else. I had talked to maybe 150 people at that point. Not one person had ever mentioned somebody climbing a pole. And so I went and I researched it, and I found the article in the journal, and that was a great fun story, because I think probably, unless you were alive in those days, it's probably not something that you remember. So that was a really fun story.
That's a good story. And you put you put the newspaper article in there.
Yes.
About him.
Yes. You have to pay for those kind of things. That was something I learned too. You can't just copy something from the paper. That one cost me $53.
Oh, really?
To use that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely a good.
There were a lot of the photographs at the beginning of the KiMo being built. A lot of people have found those fascinating, because not only do you see the theater being built, but you can sort of see the skyline on either side of the picture. And then as you go through the book, the skyline of Central and downtown Albuquerque changes and changes and changes, as does the marquee on the front of the theater and the neon sign, which is not there for a long time, and then had a big emergence when they had a big celebration when they brought it back.
Oh, that's
so there's all kinds of fun things, and how many departments and agencies and organizations are involved in anything happening at the KiMo Theater, because it's a historic building.
Right.
And so if they wanted to, do the carpet, or they wanted to add pictures or take down pictures or dust, you have to go through, I think what I listed, 18 or 20 different groups that have to be discussed.
Oh, my gosh.
So, so that was kind of fun to learn, too.
Do you want to read us something from the book?
Sure. Let me see. One of the many things that I found very interesting, and I feel like I had an opportunity the majority of people don't have, is that I was able to go and ask people if they would talk to me and have them say yes. One of those people is Verna Williamson Teller. She's a tribal elder, tribal elder, and a community activist. And maybe I'll read you just this short thing that she told me.
Okay.
So I met her on the Pueblo, and she told me many interesting things about Pueblo Beta, who named the KiMo Theater. And in many books and newspaper articles and things that I read, there would be a sentence that said that Pueblo Beta won the contest to name the KiMo Theater. There was never much information on any side of that. But she was able to tell me, and I'm not going to go into the whole story because you can read it in the book, but she had a lot of information about Pueblo Abeda and his wife and the folks from the Gutierrez Hubble House and Mr. and Mrs. Bekeke, and about how their friendship. And so that then helped me to tie in the fact that Mr. Abeda and Mr. Bekeke, who built the theater, that they were friends. And so there's a lot more to that he won the contest and named the theater. So I just kept trying to follow that thread. But this is what Verna Williamson Teller, she told me. We were talking about the naming of it, and she said that she helped me to clarify the spelling and the pronunciation of the word KIMO this way. The Isleta language is a spoken language, not a written one. When Pablo Abeda named the theater, the word he used was a Tiwa word, and it was adapted to the English form. The sound of the Isleta word, which more closely is pronounced KHIMOO, the softer sound of the K, the way it would be pronounced by the non-native peoples. The word was anglicized to KIMO, capital K, small I, capital M, small O. When spelled out and pronounced phonetically, it has the hard sound of the letter K. It is one word that means mountain lion, not two words broken into KHIM, meaning mountain, and OO, meaning lion. The Isleta word KiMo means mountain lion. But we don't have lions in New Mexico, she said. We have cougars. Sometimes they would be referred to as mountain lions. Some non-Indians refer to the lion as king. But we don't have kings. We're a monarchy. So that term doesn't come from the Pueblos. If we used the word king, we would use the Spanish word R-E-Y. Pueblo Abeda, having been educated in the East, may have used the word king to describe the mountain lion, something his non-Indian friends could relate to. That might be where the confusion came in. And I think that's really interesting because, again, that's information from 1910, 1920 that we don't have access to.
Right. I thought that was fascinating.
Having somebody go through, I think that's fascinating. I was very grateful to her.
Yes. Yeah, I thought that was intriguing. So if people want, if our listeners are interested in the book, where can they find it?
Well, they can buy it at any bookstore. Great. Or at least go to your local bookstore. That's always the best place to go. Go to a local bookstore. They could order it. It's available anywhere. It's available on Amazon or anywhere online. If somebody were in Albuquerque and they were at a Southwest Writers meeting, we have them at our Southwest Writers meetings and at the Southwest Writers office. But it can be bought anywhere.
Great, great. Well, thank you so much, Jacqueline, for talking with me today about your book, KiMo Theater, Fact and Folklore. This is Tracy Hales Vass with Right on Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM in Farmington, New Mexico. If you'd like to reach me, please write to writeon@sanjuancollege.edu.